And somewhere along the way, we've decided to tell ourselves that positive emotion in the workplace, having fun, having joy, isn't what we're after. And I think that actually can hold us back from growth.
Welcome to Rise and Stride, where we empower you to take your next step in an ever-changing business landscape. Here's your host, Denise LeDuc-Frimming, President and CEO of the California Society of CPAs.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Rise and Stride. We appreciate all of your support. Today's guest is Wes Hitchcock, a CPA at a global consulting firm who's also focused on a very hot topic today, one that is top of mind in the profession, and that is well-being and creating plans to stop burnout in accountants. Well, it couldn't be anything more important than that, Wes. Along with his CPA license, Wes has a master's degree in applied positive psychology, the science of well-being, and facilitates workshops for teams and colleagues, and is one of his firm's culture champions, a network that helps implement the firm's new values. So, Wes, thank you for joining us today. I am so excited to talk to you and learn about what I can do to help on the positivity journey and to help our members and our listeners as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Denise. Excited to be here.
Excited for the conversation. Like I said when we started, it is something that is so top of mind to everyone, and we hear a lot about busy season. We hear a lot about burnout. So maybe you can just start out telling us how you got here. So how did you make the intersection between, the CPA license, which a lot of people say we just are stressed all the time, to this is another world that I'm really interested in because they're two different parts of your brain. And what just got you on that pathway?
Yeah, sure. Good question. Yeah, I suppose I was on the back burner for a little while. I played golf in college and dealt with some pretty bad performance anxiety and probably went through a period of probably undiagnosed depression. We all go through some depressive episodes in our life, and for the most part, usually we can pull out of it naturally. But yeah, my interest in psychology began then as a college athlete, and how do we reach our potential, and how do we manage the stress of trying to fight for a spot on a team or fighting for our scholarship. So I think that's where the seed was planted for me, but it came many moons later. I guess in a word, kind of failed at the dreams I had for playing golf competitively, and turned to accounting. It seemed something challenging enough, but that felt like something I could do and felt a little bit safe. Maybe some of your listeners can resonate with that. I continued to think about these questions that had began in college of how do we reach our potential? How do we bounce back from setbacks? How can we be more optimistic? And it was, 5 years ago now. It was about 13 years into my career that I finally, worked up the courage to do something about it and applied for and got into the program you mentioned. I know it's a mouthful, the Master's in Applied Positive Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, and really had a really awesome experience. And since have been on kind of a tour to share the good news, if you will, from positive psychology. I will say I am somewhat of a defensive pessimist at heart. I think that has made me a pretty good auditor of my career, kind of looking out for what could go wrong and exercising one of my top, character strengths, which is prudence and caution. But there was some really enlightening discussions as part of that program on, we can look out for what's going wrong, but having an optimistic explanatory style makes us much more resilient when bad things happen. Do we attribute them to ourselves? Do we attribute them to some flaw, or can we point to a situational factor, and where do we go from here? So I suppose that's a long way of saying, it was a passion that had been burning for some time, and was thankful to get the opportunity to pursue it recently, to do some more scholarship in psychology.
It's interesting because when you think of the, like you said, auditing, you have to be the healthy critic or a skeptic. In essence, that's the role, right? But then the positive side doesn't mean that you see everything rose-colored glasses, right? It's maybe you take a different bent or a different lens to it. They can coexist together, and I think sometimes we think they can't.
Totally right. Your listeners might envision kind of carrying two buckets around with you. It's okay to have, a bucket of all things unpleasant and what's wrong and what needs to be fixed, but there's another bucket there that we're holding of positive emotions, joy, and the like. And we just inherently as humans, and I think even more so as accountants, have a negativity bias. And so we need to proactively counter that negativity bias by taking a moment to reflect on what's going well, what's right here, what are our strengths. And we have to do it intentionally because biologically and from an evolutionary standpoint, the negative and problem things are more salient because it's what's kept us alive for thousands of years. But more recently, we've really learned the value of positive emotions. They're very generative. I have two 7-year-old daughters, twin girls, and I see firsthand how play and experimentation and positive emotion is what builds new skills. And so if we want to master new skills, we have to be willing to engage and play and embrace positive emotion because they're very generative when it comes to learning new things.
Mm-hmm. That definitely must be, for viewing it from their eyes and seeing them. That's a whole lesson. I can imagine.
Kids are a masterclass in joy and positivity. They are my joy coaches because I feel kids, we must beat it out of ourselves at some point as we grow up, but kids naturally are drawn towards positive emotion. We're having fun. Let's keep having fun. It's the grown-up mentality that says, okay, well, it's time to have dinner. It's time to go to routine. It's time to do this and that. And so I think kids are naturally drawn towards things that give them positive emotion because the research bears out that that's how they generate new skills. That's how they learn. That's how they grow. And somewhere along the way, we've decided to tell ourselves that positive emotion in the workplace, having fun, having joy, isn't what we're after. And I think that actually can hold us back from growth. So the kids, tap into the kids in your world because they will give you a minor degree in positive psychology for sure without having to pay the tuition.
Mm-hmm. True. You can learn so much from kids. Honestly, I learn all the time. And when you said fun, I mean joy. I think one of our values we did our whole new values last year. One of them is fun, and I said we have to have fun, otherwise I can't be here. I cannot not have. I mean, you have to have the fun and the joy. Because that, to your point, keeps you going. So it's important. It's important. So a question I had, this is so interesting to me. When you were in college, you developed CPA, but not what we sometimes say coolest profession around, but you had something much more interesting. You had plan to increase resilience of accounting professionals. You use those initials and you refer to character strength, purpose, and adapting to stress. So can you talk to us a little bit more about like that? And just curious what people thought and kind of those elements.
Yeah, sure. So this is coming from that grad program at Penn as my master's thesis, trying to bring together my best thoughts on, what did I learn from this program? Some people did some experiments. I ended up doing kind of a little review of what I learned. And as best I could see it, there was a lot of topics that it really excited me, but a practical one was, how can we become more resilient? We started off talking about busy season and burnout. And at the time I was there at Penn, there was some lawyers in my cohort, and there'd already been a pretty good discussion going on, I feel like, in the law community about burnout. And a couple of my colleagues already doing some independent consulting around it. And I was curious to see, is there any literature from an accounting standpoint? And there are some accounting professors that are studying this topic, maybe not as much as I'll say in the medical profession, where burnout is a huge problem in law, but with accountants as well. And I said, well, what can we do about this? So that thesis was a synthesis of what I thought were 3 pathways towards increasing resilience. One is getting to know our strengths. We were just talking about that. We tend to focus on what's wrong and our weaknesses. There's some good data that bears out that you actually get more bang for your buck focusing on your strengths. So the C in my CPA plan for resilience stands for character strengths, getting to know what is it that's strong with you. The P stands for purpose, having a sense of purpose and meaning. I think this is one we can really lean into. There's a lot of opportunity for accountants to think about, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And I think particularly during busy season, one characterization I talk about with groups is many of us can identify with having an inner critic, this voice in our head that's giving us sometimes constructive criticism at best. Sometimes it's a lot of harsher words.
Mm-hmm.
But when our inner critic says, Wes, why, Denise, why are we doing this? Right. And that question will pop up from time to time. Having a good answer to that question, having kind of a concise purpose statement, I share positive psychology with audiences so that they're more resilient, right?
Mm-hmm.
This takes on different forms. Simon Sinek has his own sentence structure out there. It's kind of I do blank so that blank and sharing your impact. But I think having some kind of a statement that you can answer the call when your inner critic comes knocking and says, why are we doing this? I think is really powerful and resilient. And then the A in the CPA plan acronym is just adapting to stress. A number of different skills, from mindfulness to getting more movement to optimism, which we talked about briefly. Several different skills there that I teach in workshops to help people adapt to stress. So it's a 3-part acronym that I hope was easier to remember considering our audience. But character strengths, purpose, and adapting to stress skills like mindfulness are 3 pathways towards building resilience and hopefully preventing burnout.
Mm-hmm. It's easy to remember too, and it's counterintuitive sometimes. That's what we do, right? So I like it. Just gives you something to think about. So, when you think about strength, there's years ago, probably before your time, we talked a lot about you have to build. What are you lacking? We talked on the negative, and then how do you build up those gaps you have, so to speak. Now the focus has been, and I'm happy for that, is more on the strengths. Like, what are the strengths that you have as an individual and as a leader? You focus on that and talk about it. So how do managers and leaders, when they have a team, really unlock those strengths within their team so that they can be enlisting those skills and competencies kind of across the team?
Yeah, I think it starts with awareness and how good is your vocabulary? If you were to write down the names of your team members, how many of their strengths could you list? And I think that's a great exercise for all of us to undertake to build up our vocabulary of what is it that's strong with my teammate, and start with your own words. There are some diagnostics. There's a free one online that I share with groups. You can go to viacharacter.org. They have a free strengths assessment. There's a number of other ones that are for purchase. Gallup has their own strengths finder. And I'd use the strengths profile. So a number of psychometrics that you can use if you really want to get precise, if you like using those kind of instruments. But I think it starts with just noticing the behaviors in action.
Mm-hmm.
And really getting to notice, when is it a teammate perks up and smiles? I mean, when we first started this conversation, your body language changed when I asked you, why do you like doing podcasts? You said you like the conversation, meeting new people, learning, and your body language changed when you shared that, right? And I think all of us can take note. What are the tasks? What are the behaviors? What are the scenarios in which our team members light up, and write those down and consider, what are the strengths in action here that this person is kind of lighting up in this moment? And then maybe I think setting aside some time to validate that with the person, because we don't want to mischaracterize, but we can ask them, what do you think your strengths are, and make sure they're taking ownership, right? So I think it's a 2-way of building fluency and strengths. You can do that organically through observation, and you can also, there's a number of different diagnostic tools you can use that can give you and your teammate a richer vocabulary of what is this behavior that we're noticing, and then calling it out. Like, I think you say, like, okay, next steps, what do I do? I think is naming it. I remember receiving sales training at one point, and they talked about the power of saying someone's name. I think there's real power in calling out someone's strengths. So instead of just kind of like a pat on the back, thanks for your hard work. Denise, I really appreciated your curiosity in that meeting. You asked a great question and got a great insight from the client, right? So you're naming that strength of curiosity. And I think it's like calling someone by their name. I think that they really feel recognized when you spot their strengths in action.
Mm-hmm. Those are really, that's a great tips, because I think it's something we can do right away.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, it requires awareness. And I think sometimes that's the piece that's harder than honestly doing the tests or going through some of the work. It's really being present, to your point, and noticing, saying it, and calling it out, because it is important. And you do see people light up. I notice it too when I talk to people, and they're, when they get to their passion piece or something they really, speaks to them, it is the light goes on.
Right. But we have to take time. We need to write these things down and catalog them. Just the way our performance development systems are designed, oftentimes it's about developing competencies, getting to the next level. It's always about, like you said, the efficiencies, and we have to fight that bias. We have to really take the time to process and be aware of, what is it that's strong about this person, and double down on that and name it when we see it, because it's much easier for us to spot what's wrong. We're very good at that as accountants. It's much harder to take stock of what's going well.
I think the world conditions you that way too, sometimes. It's just the negative that gets the attention, right? And not as much the positive. So I like it. Name it. I think it's a great takeaway. Like I said, I had some good notes here. So maybe, Wes, you can give us your viewpoint on, we talk a lot about culture versus hiring for skills. And what do you think about that? I mean, there's been all different, case studies and, materials on that. But what are your thoughts on that from an organizational behavior standpoint?
Yeah, I wish I could phone a friend to my colleagues in our talent acquisition group. I have to admit, talent acquisition and hiring is not something I do on a day-to-day. So it's not my area of expertise. But maybe just folding in where we were just what we just discussed. I'd love to see some discussion of strengths as part of the hiring process, which I guess in a way gets to what you mentioned, skills. Skills feel like they could be developed. I mean, strengths can be developed as well, but and the culture piece is just a whole nother animal, right? And we have a group that's dedicated to this at our firm, but I have a bit of a hypothesis on that I've been exposed to the Myers-Briggs psychometric. I don't know if you're familiar with that, right? And so this is coming from like Carl Jung's theories around how we take in information and how we make decisions. And I'm just mindful that there is that dichotomy of decision-making of, do I make decisions very analytically, or do I make decisions based on, they use the word feeling. I kind of attribute that more to like values-based decision-making. And I just wonder, I haven't tested this, but I wonder if accountants kind of lean more towards the analytical decision-making versus the value-based. And I bring all that up because, we'd all love to have a good culture. You mentioned your values of joy, but push comes to shove, if your default decision-making protocol is more of a pro-con, analytical analysis, and less so consulting your values, then that could be pretty challenging to get everybody on board with practicing those values, and becomes very intentional. So I guess getting back to your question, I guess maybe I would punt and say a mixture of the two, culture and skills, and a sprinkle of strengths that you think would be a good fit for the team.
Do you think, it's just curious, because we've had this conversation before internally, and I've had it with others. Do you think it's important for when individuals are looking for a position, a role, they look at the organization and they say, okay, this organization has these values and I can connect with those, or I can't connect with those? Do you think that's part of the process as well, is for an individual to take that sort of undertaking and review before they say yes or they go further?
I would think in all cases it's a yes, but even more so, to build on what we just discussed, if you are very much a value-based decision maker, I'll give you an example. I bought a Tesla recently, right? I thought it was good for the environment. There's a lot of things that I just reviewed analytically that were great. Now there's some people that are not liking that decision, based on the CEO of the company and maybe a disconnect in values, So for me, there's less dissonance there because I still think it's the right choice for the environment. I like the car. I can agree to disagree with some of what the CEO of that company thinks. But for others, that might be a deal breaker. So I think for you, it depends on how important, getting back to the Myers-Briggs, if you really make decisions based on your core values, then I think that review of values is really important. Even more so than anyone else.
It's a good example.
There's a consultant we work with, Institute for Human Performance. Am I blanking on his name? I have my own senior moment now. Not exactly a spring chicken. It'll come to me. He wrote a book called Performing Under Pressure. He came and talked at our firm, and he does a lot of culture work. And he said something that struck me, that culture exists on teams and not necessarily at an organizational level. That was the finding of his consulting work, that culture exists on teams. Like, those norms and values are really played out from team to team. Dr. J.P. Palufry came back to me. was the name. So to the point of your question about looking for in a company, I would say I would get to know who are the teammates that I'm going to work with, even more so than the company at large, because I do think there's a lot of validity in what he said, that culture exists in teams even more so than the organization.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you say that, because when I talk to young professionals and just, to those that are, mid-tier, they talk about the team and how much they appreciate the team and the leader, right, to your point. And that's almost the reason they're there, is because of that. So it's interesting that you say that, and so much more important for you as a leader to be cognizant of what you're doing. And I honestly believe it's a privilege. It's a privilege, and you shouldn't take it lightly. That's interesting. I have not heard anyone say that like that, but when I kind of think about it, it lines up with what I've heard over the years. I like that.
Yeah, seems to fit the anecdote you shared. Sure.
Yeah. One other question I had was, we've talked a lot about the organization's responsibility to unlock the potential in leaders and so forth, set the stage, the tone. What is the responsibility of each individual as they go into a role, show up to be there? What do they need to do?
Yeah, I suppose there's 3 tiers to all this. You just mentioned the organization, we just talked about team, and then individual. And from my vantage point, yeah, when it comes to resilience and the well-being of our people, I think you need to be tackling things at all 3 levels. So organizationally, how do we get rocks out of people's shoes? Do they have the right technology? Are they in the right place, doing the right thing? So more systematic things. The systematic things can create stress, right? The team is the next kind of level down. The anecdotes out there, people don't leave companies, they leave bad managers or bad bosses, right? So you said it, the leader of a team has an outside impact on someone's experience. So I think team, how good are the team's communication? I was reading recently on stress.org. Communication, or really lack thereof, is one of the leading stressors in the workplace, right? Mm-hmm. When things are unclear or ambiguous, that gets our sympathetic nervous system going. We get into fight or flight, and we don't make good decisions, and we don't feel that great either. So I think team communications is important. But yeah, I think at an individual level, there's a lot of things we can do to learn and grow and thrive and sustain our well-being. I think it starts with just understanding where you're at, whether it's working with a coach or a mentor, or figuring out, what is it that's perhaps causing you stress? Where in your growth do you feel stuck? What's not working well for you? And as I say those words out loud, I'm conscious of the negativity bias of that. And the flip side is what are your strengths and what's strong with you, and how can we double down on those things? Mm-hmm. So I think as an individual, to the extent you have autonomy, which we're all after, I think there's a lot of room there for you to grow and develop and use tools that are becoming more widely available now, whether it's mindfulness or breathing techniques or the whole host of online learning systems that are available for people's learning and growth. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, there's a lot of tools out there. It's, you mentioned the communication. I think at the heart of, when people have disagreements or there's issues, most of the time it's a communication. They probably are on the same page, but the communication is like this, right? At odds. So how do you, what would be your thoughts on, you want to make sure you communicate in a, respectful, positive, clear, you said, way. How do you do that when everything is moving so fast? What's a tip you have?
Well, there's one thing I've learned from my career in auditing, it's a sense of preparation, review. And I think if you can get yourself into a review mode, whether that's using an AI tool like Microsoft Copilot to draft the message, whether it's just setting the message aside. I know you mentioned quick. When we act quickly is when we fall down, right? There's a great story that's told of they did this experiment with a number of priests, and they had them walk down a path, and there was a Samaritan, if you will, lying on the street, kind of moaning, looking like they needed help. And the priests that they said were late to go give their sermon walked right past the person, right? This is a priest of a church, and they're commissioned to help people. And the people that said, "Oh, you've got plenty of time," they stopped. So time pressure is really a factor in this. So if you can maybe tuck that email away for a side and come back to it and reread it, have somebody else on your team have a look and just say, "Hey, how do you think this will land?" Getting back to Myers-Briggs a little bit, I like their thoughts around decision making of gather the facts. What's your intuition telling you? use that analytical mind of, does this make sense? And I think the last part is where we fall down. How is this going to land? How is this going to make somebody feel when they receive it? And I think that's where many accountants, not all, we're human beings. So, and for the most part, we fall on a normal distribution. There'll be some accountants that are better at this than others, but I think we have some improvement on how is this going to land? How's this communication going to make somebody feel? I can tell you that's something that I continue to work on myself. How is this going to make somebody feel is so important.
Yeah, that's usually not a step that people take, right? I have people look at my emails. If I know it's a sensitive or an email, right? If it's just a transactional, sometimes that's different. I have always a set of eyes on them because you can miss it just because your lens is different, right? And the feel is important. It's a really good tip, Wes.
If you think about the people who are good at getting what they want, for example, a good salesperson, and I've done some coaching with a coach on this, the first thing that they will ask is, how do you want the other person to feel? Whether you're doing a sales pitch or a presentation, when you get coaching on being a good negotiator, presenter, salesperson, it's always, what's your objective? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want them to do? But how do you want them to feel? Mm-hmm. And that's just the core of their thinking. And for me, it just was like a whole new way of thinking, and it's not natural. So it's something for me to continue to practice, and maybe something that your listeners don't come up with anything else today. That's a good thing to jot down. How is my message making somebody feel, whether it's what I'm saying or what I'm not saying? Sometimes it's an ambiguous email that really can get people stressed, right? So don't ever send anyone, for all of those of you listening, don't send somebody, hey, let's discuss, right? Without any context, because that can get people really gone.
Yeah, it can.
Can we talk? Can we chat later? Okay, well, about what?
Exactly. Now it's so true. It is. So we're getting close on our time, and I just wanted to ask you one last question. Is so interesting to us is, what would be the one tip? I mean, I think it's, how does it make people feel? Is there another tip that you would say, take this away today, and it will help you as you navigate this world that is uncertain, moving fast, and there's a lot of different pieces to be positive, right? To feel that.
Yeah, I think positive emotion is something that we just don't get enough of. There's a software company out of Michigan, and their founder wrote a book called Joy Inc. And joy is in one of their core values. And so just finding ways to have joy. Brené Brown says that joy is one of the most vulnerable emotions. And I get it, right? It's this feeling where you're on the mountain, you feel like you've let your guard down and you're experiencing this sense of bliss. And it really just feels like, I guess, that someone's going to come up and bite you. But really in the workplace, there isn't someone that's going to come and attack us, really. And I think the more your listeners realize that leaning into joy isn't a risk, nothing's going to fall down. Everyone here is a high performer. They're working hard. They have their to-do list. Lean into joy for a little while. I think what you'll find is that positive emotion actually helps you be more productive on the next task. And in a counterintuitive way, again, positive emotion, whereas maybe it's seen as a bit of a risk and maybe a distraction, I think it can really be performance enhancing. It's a performance enhancing drug in my book. So lean into joy whenever you can, maybe with the heart of a 7-year-old girl, like one of my girls. Just try to get vulnerable with some more positive emotion at work.
Mm-hmm. I think people will be surprised. That's a great tip, Wes. And when they lean into it, what you give off, sometimes people come back with the same, right? So I think that's a great takeaway to end with, is lean into the joy. And I like what you said, like a 7-year-old would, because that joy is very different than what we think. Well, Wes, thank you for being here with us. And most of all, thank you for spreading your positivity and your joy out there in our profession. I mean, we need more Wes's out there. And just the fact that you're talking about it and you train on that and you spread the word, it means a lot to me. And then I think to the profession, just to make sure we can combat some of the burnout and stress that's out there. So thank you.
No, my pleasure. It's a privilege to be able to do this work, try to support people that are out there in front of our clients. So thanks for having me. And thanks for putting this podcast on to help support the growth of your CPAs there in California.
Thank you. Oh, we're the joy spreaders. That's what we're going to be.
Joy spreaders. Go for it.
Love it. Well, thank you again, Wes.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks.
Rise and Stride is produced by the California Society of Certified Public Accountants. To learn more, visit calcpa.org.